I still remember that morning like it's carved into my bones. The rain had been falling since before dawn, a cold, steady drizzle that slicked the courthouse steps and turned the red dirt streets into rivers of rust. The whole town was there, men in pressed suits and women clutching their purses tight, faces hard as the weather. They weren't there for justice. They were there for a show. At the center of it all was a man I'd known all my life, Thomas Reed, 23 years old, factory worker, soft-spoken, and on that day walking up those steps in handcuffs, he looked different, not scared, not broken, just steady. I didn't know it then, but that morning was going to change everything. For him, for me, for this whole damn town. Thomas wasn't the kind of man you noticed right away. He kept to himself, did his work, went to church on Sundays. His hands were always stained with machine grease from the factory. He talked more about carburetors than politics. But everyone in Ashford knew he had plans to marry his fiancée, Sarah, and move to Birmingham where the pay was better and the rules weren't so tight on where a colored man could sit, eat, or sleep. Back then, in 1963 Alabama, a man like Thomas couldn't even drink from the same water fountain as me without getting looks. We had colored-only signs like they were part of the landscape, like stop signs or streetlights. Then one night it happened. It was late and the town was quiet. That strange, heavy silence you get after midnight. I was closing up the store when I saw two police cars roll slow down Main Street. They stopped Thomas as he was walking home from the factory. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw the way one officer, Sheriff Daniels, poked his chest with two fingers, hard. The other one, a younger deputy, shifted like he didn't want to be there. Later, I'd hear their story. Thomas was breaking curfew. Problem was, there was no curfew, not for anyone. When Thomas asked why he was being stopped, Daniels claimed he assaulted him. I saw Thomas's hands. They never left his pockets. By the time they shoved him into the back of the cruiser, I knew this wasn't about curfew. It was about control. The days that followed felt like the whole town had been holding its breath. The news spread quick. Thomas Reed's in jail. Some people shook their heads, said they weren't surprised. Others, like me, knew better. Sarah, God bless her, didn't waste a second. She went from church to church, talking to anyone who'd listen. She even came to my store, stood by the counter and said, "They want to make an example out of him. But if they think we'll just stand by, they're wrong." That's when I learned the truth. Thomas' case wasn't just about him. It was about warning the rest of us what would happen if we got too bold. The civil rights protests in Birmingham had been all over the radio. White folks in Ashford didn't want that here. Reverend Johnson stepped in, a tall, steady man with a voice that carried like church bells. He'd been quietly working with the NAACP. He promised Sarah they'd get Thomas a lawyer from Montgomery. For a moment, it felt like hope. Then, 2 nights before the lawyer was set to arrive, his car was found in a ditch outside of town, windshield shattered, tires slashed. No one needed to say what happened. Sarah found a neighbor who'd seen the arrest. He swore he'd testify that Thomas never resisted. But the next morning, that neighbor's windows were broken, and by sundown, he'd packed his family and left town. It was like watching a chess game where every piece we moved got knocked off the board before we could even think about the next one. One afternoon, I walked past the jail. Through the narrow barred window, I saw Thomas sitting on his cot, staring at the floor. I asked him if he was all right. He looked up and said, "They want me to sign a confession, told me I could walk free if I did." "And?" I asked. He shook his head. "Freedom ain't freedom if I gotta lie to get it." I'll never forget walking into that courtroom. The air was hot, heavy with the smell of old wood and cheap cologne. Thomas stood by the defense table, no lawyer beside him, just the sheriff smirking in the corner. The prosecutor told the jury a neat little story. Thomas attacked an officer, resisted arrest, and needed to be taught a lesson. The jury nodded along like they'd already made up their minds. And then, the back doors opened. Reverend Johnson walked in first, his head high. Behind him came Sarah, her chin set like stone. Then came dozens of townspeople, black and white, filling every empty seat. But the real surprise was Deputy Harris. He wasn't in uniform. In his hands, he carried a small roll of film. When the prosecutor finished, Harris stepped forward. "Your Honor," he said, voice shaking just enough to make the room lean in, I have photographs from the night in question. They showed Thomas standing still, hands in his pockets, while Sheriff Daniels grabbed him. No sign of resistance, no attack. The room went silent except for the sound of the judge clearing his throat. For the first time, Daniels looked nervous. Minutes later, the judge announced his decision, not guilty. When the gavel came down, the air in that courtroom changed. Some folks left in a hurry. Others stayed, just sitting there, like they needed a minute to believe what they'd seen. Thomas didn't leave Ashford. He stayed, working at the factory, marching when the movement came through, speaking at schools about what happened that day. Years later, people would say it was small, just one case in one little town. But I know better, because sometimes it only takes one man standing his ground and one town finding its voice to change the way history remembers you. And that's the day. Ashford went silent. History may change its clothing, but the truth beneath often stays the same. Do you think something like this could still happen today?